Good afternoon. Hello. Yes, please. Please. Anton Vernitsky, Channel 1. Mr. President, please summarize the results of today. What happened behind closed doors, especially at a meeting in a narrow format with your colleagues in the EU? What kind of bilateral meetings have you had, maybe those that we don't know about yet? And the word sanctions sounded again many times during the speeches. To what extent do sanctions affect the activities of the Eurasian Economic Union? Thank you. As for bilateral meetings, there was a meeting just ended without the press. We had such a working meeting with the president of Uzbekistan. And we talked about our current affairs, prospects for the near future, checked the clock on possible major joint investment projects. And in my opinion, and in the opinion of Shahad Miramonovich Berzioyev, all these things are quite realizable. We are talking about energy, including, perhaps, nuclear energy, infrastructure projects, and the metallurgical industry. In general, there are serious things that have been discussed by our governments for some time, and we are gradually approaching their implementation. The second meeting was with the Crown Prince of the United Arab Emirates. We also talked about our current bilateral relations, and we are waiting for the President of the United Arab Emirates to visit Russia. Naturally, we talked in both cases about the situation in the Ukrainian direction and the situation in the Middle East. As for the results of our meeting today, the Eurosec summit, we are satisfied with the results and have summed up certain results. The President of Belarus has already said that our development strategy, which was designed until this year, is coming to an end. We are thinking about what and how to build our joint work further, but in general, the results of the work cannot but satisfy us. They satisfy us all. Why? Well, because the main integral indicator of the efficiency of the economy is the rate of economic growth. And in our Eurosec, it is higher than the global average rate. Global growth is 3 3/10%, as you know. There are more than 4 euroses, much more, and in some countries seriously more. There are 5, and almost 6, in my opinion, some of them are approaching. Therefore, this is, among other things, not least the result of our joint work. Since it and its meaning is to remove trade and other various barriers in the economic sphere for joint work. This, without any exaggeration, multiplies the opportunities for economic growth. But as a social indicator of economic development, it is, of course, both the unemployment rate and the level of real wage growth. Because, well, it's about the same in other countries, but I will say in Russia, we have 2 3/10 of unemployment. After all, this is one of the key indicators of what is happening in the economy, in all economies of the world. And it's the same in about our other countries. And the second very important indicator is the level of investment. They are also increasing in Russia, despite all our unknown difficulties, but still this process continues. And, of course, we cannot be satisfied with this work. But there are always issues that require additional attention. We discussed issues related to the removal of barriers in the service sector in a narrow circle. But there are issues that require additional research. There are things related to electronic signature. This is a very important direction. This is an informal thing, which, if introduced at the international level, will also create good conditions for expanding cooperation. Here, too, there are issues that we discussed today in general, related to ensuring that the reliability is confirmed, related to how we will regulate sanctions in case of any violations, and so on, so that participants in economic activity do not flow from one jurisdiction to another, but act within the framework of the single economic space. In other words, there is nothing that would constitute difficulties of any political nature. We all believe that this is the way to go. This is a legal and technical issue. First of all, it is necessary to regulate and finalize these issues at the government level. We agreed that we will do this in the coming months, and the next meeting, it is informal, as a rule, but still connected with the business part. So, according to tradition, the next meeting will be held on the eve of the new year in St. Petersburg. And the sanctions? Well, yes. Yes, sanctions. Well, to be honest, we are already formally mentioning something about this, but no one has seriously delved into this topic there.
Hello, RIA Novosti. If possible, I have a question on another topic, but also very important. You have already mentioned that the Ukrainian topic was touched upon during the recent bilateral contacts. Tell me how the Ukrainian settlement process is progressing now. In particular, when the third round of negotiations between Russia and Ukraine will take place, to have already taken place in Istanbul, and it is also known that the two sides exchanged their draft memoranda on the settlement. How do you like the Ukrainian side's project, the Kiev project? How do you assess it, and was there any reaction from Kiev to the Russian draft memorandum after all?
As for the memoranda, as expected, nothing unexpected happened. I won't tell you anything unexpected. These are two completely opposite of the memorandum. But negotiations are organized and conducted in order to look for ways of rapprochement. Well, the fact that they were directly opposite, it seems to me, there is nothing surprising here either. I would not like to go into details, because I consider it inappropriate, even harmful, to preempt the negotiations themselves. As for what was done as a result of the negotiations, I think you can see for yourself. Today, in my opinion, another exchange was made. And yet today, in my opinion, yes. And yet it is important, this humanitarian component is important because it creates conditions for, as diplomats say, for a substantive discussion of the essence of the problem. And we agreed in such a way that we would continue further contacts after the completion of the exchanges. And after the humanitarian action that we proposed, namely, we are talking about the transfer of the bodies of our dead servicemen. We have already given over 6,000 bodies and are ready to give almost 3,000 more. But it's up to the Ukrainian side to accept the bodies of its fallen soldiers. And we agreed in such a way that after the completion of this stage, we will hold a third round of negotiations. In general, we are ready for this. We need to agree on the place and time, but I hope that the President of the Republic of Turkey, Mr. Erdogan, remains in his positions to support this process. We are very grateful to him for this. We are ready to hold such a meeting in Istanbul. But when exactly? These are the leaders of the negotiating groups on both sides, and they, by the way, are in constant contact. In operational contact with each other. They constantly call up, and, in my opinion, this is already not bad. They are now agreeing among themselves on the time of the next meeting. Well, what will be the subject? The subject, in my opinion, it should be a discussion memoranda as one, and with the other hand. Yes, please. Good afternoon. Pavel Zarubin, Russia TV channel. You, your colleagues, have just completed the summit of the Eurasian Union. And the former partners have recently completed the NATO summit, and there a decision was made to increase defense spending to 5% of GDP. And in general, there is a flurry of voices from Europe calling for militarization and Europe's so aggressive position. This is generally something new in modern history. How do you assess what is happening? First of all, the so-called Western community, the collective West, if at all it can be called so collective today. But nevertheless it turns everything upside down. Why? Because both the increase in military spending and the militaristic frenzy that we have just mentioned. After all, everything is based on one thesis, on Russia's aggressiveness. And this is exactly the opposite. After all, now the cutoff of all these arguments is 2022 year, the beginning of a special military operation. But how we all approached this special military operation, no one says a word about it. And it all started with what? From the fact that we were cheated rudely, as we say among the people. They threw us simply because of the non-expansion of NATO to the east. It is well known to everyone, the whole world knows that Russia was promised, not a single inch to the east it will not be necessary to move. And then, one wave of expansion with another. After all, what have we been talking about all the time? That the security of one country, or group of countries, cannot be ensured at the expense of the security of another. And so it is spelled out in international documents that have been agreed by all. What happened in practice? One expansion after another. And we were told all the time, but you should not be afraid of it, it does not threaten you. And when we answered that we thought it threatened us, what did they answer us? Nothing at all. They just sent us away with our opinions. And absolutely no one considered him, and did not want to be considered. But we know better what threatens us and what is not. It is our right to determine the degree of our security and the level of threats that may approach us from one side or the other. But no one listened to us, and we all moved in this direction. Isn't that aggressive behavior? This is aggressive behavior that the West does not want to pay attention to. The same thing happened in our country when the collective West supported separatism in our country, and such an instrument of the fight against Russia as terrorism. No one wanted to pay attention to some kind of ISIS if it functions in Russia. And the explosions in Moscow, and everything that has been happening lately. And no one wants to pay attention to it. Everything is fine if it's against Russia. Well, haven't we seen it, or what? And they see and understand everything perfectly there, but they talk about something else. They talk about our aggressiveness. Look at yourself. We have a good saying. They notice a speck in someone else's eye, they don't want to see logs in their own. And what happens? It is against the background of this rhetoric about the alleged aggressiveness of Russia that they begin to talk about the need to arm themselves. Well, let them arm themselves. Let's look at the structure of these expenditures, the structure of these weapons. In the first part I said, we consider the reference to aggressive passions to be absolutely unfounded. We are not aggressive, but this so-called collective aggressive West. The same thing happened in Ukraine, by the way. But what about it? What should we call what happened as a result of a coup supported by the collective West? First they came, signed guarantees between the president, the presidential authorities and the opposition. Then a few days later, they carried out a coup, supported him, paid money for it, publicly confessed to it, right? And then they started talking about Russia behaving aggressively. What is this? They are idiots themselves, or they accept us fools. Then we all know what happened in the Donbas. 8 years. 8 years of bloody war against the civilian population, in fact. And we have been trying for 8 years to come to an agreement to resolve this issue peacefully. We were deceived, publicly confessed about it again. Well, both the former Chancellor of Germany and the former President of France publicly said that they were not going to fulfill the Minsk agreements with him, and they signed all this just to pump weapons on the Ukrainian regime. And they waged this undeclared war for 8 years. And in order to put an end to this war, we were eventually forced to adopt armed forces, recognizing the independence of both republics in strict accordance with the UN Charter. No one pays attention to this. Everything is just from now on. Why? What happened? How did this happen? What is their fault? As if they were babies at all, who were born only yesterday. That won't do. This one-goal game is over. The military wants to increase their spending. Well, let them increase it, but this also indicates their aggressiveness. Now I will explain why. Yes, we have a lot of expenses today. This is 6.3% of GDP. Is it a lot or a little? I believe that a lot. And this, of course, is one of the problems, including for the budget, that we must solve. And we solve it with dignity. By the way, I don't want to draw political analogies now, because the causes of the conflict are completely different, but only from the point of view of financial and economic, say, during the Korean War, which the United States waged. They spent 14% of the budget on this. And during the Vietnam War, 10%. True, these problems were solved mainly by increasing taxation on persons with large incomes, in which in the first case, they did not pay attention to macroeconomics. In the second, they already treated it more sensibly. But we are fighting for a healthy macroeconomics. Now about the expenses themselves. 6.3%, is it a lot or a little? 6.3% of Russia's GDP for defense needs is 13.5 trillion rubles. And our entire GDP is 223 trillion rubles. Is 13.5 from 223 a lot or a little? Quite a lot. Quite a lot. We paid for it with inflation, but we are now struggling with this inflation. Yes, we are purposefully going to ensure that the economy makes a soft landing in some way. But nevertheless, we are still very sensible about this. By the way, I have already mentioned this. The level of wages is increasing in all the countries of the Eurasian Economic Union and in Russia. Last year, it increased by 9.7%, and in the first 4 or 5 months of this year, it added 4% in real terms. By the way, this is at least a satisfactory indicator. This is what is happening in Western countries. They bury us all the time. They themselves will soon die there. And they bury us all the time. They didn't stop. Here we have 4.3% economic growth last year. The year before that, 4.3 and 4.1. This will be much more modest in order to combat inflation, but we are purposefully doing this. In the Eurozone, growth is 0 as much as 0.9%, and in the leading economies. Industrial development centers in Europe, they're in general, both in Germany and in France. Everything is teetering on the verge of recession. As for the armed forces, they keep saying that we have some problems. We will soon achieve a strategic defeat in Russia. This rhetoric has not stopped until now. And at the same time, they broadcast that we are going to attack NATO countries. Where is the logic? If everything is falling apart, so why are we going to attack NATO? Well, they are talking nonsense, and they definitely don't believe it themselves, but their population is trying to convince them of this. In order to squeeze more money out of people, and so that they agree to bear the heavy burden of these expenses in the social sphere. By the way, we spend these trillions largely on what? For the maintenance of our military-industrial complex, for ourselves, but for our loved ones and relatives. And they will spend their 5% on what? For purchase in the USA and for support of their military-industrial complex. It's not our question, it's theirs. If they want to, let them do it. But now here's the most important thing. We are planning to reduce defense spending. We have plans for the next year and the year after, for the next 3 years, until there are final agreements. Between the Ministry of Defense, the Ministry of Finance, the Ministry of Economic Development. But in general, everyone is thinking in this direction. And Europe is thinking about how to raise its defense spending. So who is preparing for some aggressive actions? Us or them? Yes, we want to complete a special military operation with the result we need. Of course. But this is exactly what we are calculating for, and not for aggressive plans against Europe and NATO countries. And we plan to reduce costs, and they plan to increase. So who's being aggressive? This is also the basis of defense and security policy. Therefore, all these arguments about what they are going to raise. Well, let them raise it, but it will not improve the security situation for them, but it will invariably worsen in the economic and social spheres.
Interfax agency Ksenia Chernieva, Vladimir Vladimirovich. Just recently, the president of France announced the need to introduce another package of sanctions against Russia. And, judging by the statements of European officials, this package of sanctions may include measures such as lowering the ceiling of the price of Russian oil up to $45, and secondary sanctions for its buyers. How do you feel about such measures? The rhetoric of the French president, and what consequences can there be of such decisions?
I have already partially answered this question. The more sanctions, the worse it is for those who impose these sanctions. This also applies to France. This applies to the economy of Europe as a whole. After all, if you look at the statistics, the volume of gas purchased, let's say, has increased due to Europe began to buy more. Well, how much is it today? $400+ euros per 1,000 cubic meters. Now the price of oil has dropped a little bit, but not a little bit, but from 75 to 65 or 66. How much it is now there all the time? And if something else happens in the same Middle East, what will happen? And our oil will be covered. Well, at least they will cover it somehow, although they will not be able to do it. It's just not possible, in fact. To date, the volume of oil and petroleum products consumed in the world is growing due to the growth of the economy itself. There's no getting away from it. Volumes are growing. And production is increasing only in the volume that we agreed within OPEC+, and it is designed for increasing demand, especially in summer. You see, I don't see anything here that would benefit the European economy. Whether it will be any harm for us, we will see, based on the realities that will develop. But I don't think it will significantly affect us. I mean, hundreds, thousands of sanctions have already been imposed, and we are where we are, as I said. We had economic growth of 4.3% last year, and in the Eurozone 0.9, 0.8. Please, come on. Well, Andrew. Good afternoon. Andrei Kolesnikov, Kommersant newspaper. Vladimir Vladimirovich, don't you have a feeling that it's time for you to meet Donald Trump in person? Then from the outside there is a feeling that you are somehow moving away from each other. Well, a phone is a phone, and eye to eye, as they say, is eye to eye. What do you think? I treat the current President of the United States with great respect. He has gone through a very difficult and unsafe path of returning to power and to the White House. We all know this very well, even to the point that he survived an attempt, and more than one attempt on his life. He's a courageous man, that's clear. What he is doing inside the country, what he is doing in the sphere of, say, the situation in the Middle East, and his efforts to resolve the Ukrainian crisis. Of course, we appreciate all this very much, and I have already said this, and I want to say it publicly, and now. I believe that President Trump sincerely seeks to resolve the issue on the Ukrainian track. Here he recently, in my opinion, stated that it turned out to be more difficult than it seemed from the outside. Well, it is. And there's nothing special here either. It's one thing to look from the outside, but it's another thing to immerse yourself in the problem. The same way, I think, is happening in the Middle East. Everyone, although he may have had a lot of experience there, and he was more involved in events in the Middle East. But even there, everything is complicated. Real life is always more complicated than the idea of it. I am always open to contacts and meetings, and I know that Mr. Trump has also expressed the possibility, talked about the possibility of meetings. Well, I, like him, believe that such meetings need to be prepared. And according to the results, we must reach some new frontiers of cooperation. In general, thanks to President Trump, relations between Russia and the United States are beginning to even out in some way. Not everything has been resolved in the sphere of diplomatic relations, but still the first steps have been taken, and we are moving on. We have established working contact between the main departments and between the State Department and the Ministry of Foreign Affairs, between special services, which is also very important because, let's say, such an aspect as the fight against terrorism. It is important for us in any situation. And in terms of some other services, we have very good prospects in the field of non-economic cooperation. And we know that American businesses show desire, aspiration, and send us signals that they would like to return to our market. We will only welcome it. All this needs to be prepared. And so, in general, this meeting is quite possible, and we will be happy to prepare it. Thank you very much. Have a nice day.